Well, good morning again. Here we are back to talking to myself. Hope you guys are doing well. Hey, I want to tell you guys about Bethlehem. I know it's past Christmas time. You know the story of Bethlehem and Christ being born. I know you know all that. But I'm not going to tell you about that as much as I am going to tell you about Bethlehem itself. As it turns out, there's some pretty cool things that happen in Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is really a kind of a center place for a lot of things, a lot of neat things that happen. So I want to tell you about some of those. You might surprise you, but the first time Bethlehem is mentioned in the Bible, try to take a guess. People would say, well, the New Testament, Jesus was there, so Bethlehem, you know, whatever. So it was Genesis, the 48th chapter, verse 7, talks about Bethlehem. Now, the reason it talks about Bethlehem is because Rachel was traveling through there. Isaac had told Jacob, he said to leave and go find a wife. And he found Rachel, if you remember, and he worked 7 years for her. That's the whole idea there. He would work 7 years for Rachel, and his dad slipped in Leah. And so he had to work 7 more years. So 14 years he worked there for Laban. And so when about 10 to 12 years later, after all that, Jacob says, okay, I'm taking off. I'm out of here. So he took his whole family and everything, took off to go back where he came from area. And anyway, when he was on the way there, Rachel was pregnant and she was going to have a baby. And she had a baby right there on their travels. But you know what? She died. Benjamin was what the name of the boy was that was born to her, and she died right there on the trip having Benjamin. So he buried her right there next to the road, kind of, or on the trail, or in that area, whatever, and called it Rachel's tomb. And the place where he went to was a place called Ephrath, and that's where all this happened. And when you read the Bible and study, it says, which is Bethlehem. So Rachel, she's one of my favorite characters in Scripture. That was just pretty cool. She's just a neat lady. But anyway, she died in childbirth on the way to where they were headed with their new family and all, and she was buried there at Ephrath, or Bethlehem. And what's really neat is, about 800 years later, most people forget. I mean, you probably don't know where your grandparents were born, or your great-grandparents, or things like that. But anyway, about 800 years later, Saul is wandering around with some guys looking for his father's donkeys. They're wandering around trying to find them. They went to this place, went to that place, and so while they were wandering around, Samuel was looking for Saul because the Lord had told him to anoint him as king. And so he was looking for Saul, and Saul was looking for his dad's donkeys. And the people looking for the donkey said, let's go ask this prophet. He's supposed to be in the area. He was going to be at a feast that same day. Let's go ask him where those donkeys are. So they went over and used the man of God, or the priest, the prophet, to see if they would help him find these donkeys. And anyway, the reason I'm telling you that is he told me, he said, well, go to Rachel's tomb, and you'll find out there, there'll be 2 guys there, and they'll tell you where, because they found the donkeys. So 800 years later, they're still using that tomb of Rachel, which is in Bethlehem, as landmarks for things that happened. I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, anyway, then Ruth, if you remember Ruth, she left with her mother-in-law, Naomi, and she had a sister, went with her. If you remember, her name was Orpah, something like that. It was not Oprah, no, she's not in the Bible. Orpah, and Orpah decided not to go with them, but Naomi and Ruth, they took off together, if you remember, went back to find their kinsmen and all that kind of stuff. And when they got there, she found Boaz, and Boaz took her to be his wife and redeemed her and her family to preserve the family. And the reason I'm telling you that, guess where that happened? In Bethlehem. And so it's really kind of cool because when he took her for a wife, it happened at the front gate there, and they had witnesses there, and that's when they did all their business there at the front gate. And they said, "Oh, may you be made very famous in Bethlehem because you're taking this lady and doing, you know, what you're doing." So that's pretty cool. So Ruth took Boaz, or Boaz took Ruth there, and the two of them had a young man named Obed, which I won't go into time and tell you who he was, except he was the son of Ruth and Boaz. And Obed had a little boy named Jesse. Now you may remember Jesse easier because Jesse had a little boy. His name was David, all right there in Jerusalem. And what's cool is now we're into David's life, and Samuel actually anoints David as king right there in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, he was out taking care of his dad's sheep, you remember? And Samuel came in and said, "Okay, where's all your kids at? Because one of these kids is going to be, you know, the king." And, "Oh, no, here's one, here's another one, here's another one." And he said, "Well, none of them, God didn't choose any of those. You have another one?" "Oh, yeah, but he's out watching the sheep." Little young kid out there, you know, watching the sheep. "Bring him in here." So they brought him in, and he said, "Yeah, this is the kid." So he anointed him right there in Bethlehem as to be king. So it was kind of a cool thing that all this happened right there, and kind of is the hub of all this the Christianity kind of a thing. Pretty cool. Now, what was neat too is David was in battle one time. Well, before we get to that battle, remember when he took on Goliath? It wasn't far from Bethlehem, because he got up early one morning, left his father's sheep, and took off and took some provisions to his brothers. And while he was there, actually, it sounds like he came back and then he was brought back out there. But anyway, doesn't matter. But anyway, not far from Bethlehem is where this David and Goliath came to conflict, because it talks about David going back after that. So anyway, then in another battle, when David was older, he was in a stronghold out there outside of Bethlehem, quite a ways, I understand. Not a long way for us today, but for them it was a ways. But the Philistines had Bethlehem, and they had it under siege there. Now the reason is, see, when Jerusalem was established, then Bethlehem was one of the places for them to store oils and ammunition and stuff like, not ammunition, but, you know, war implements and stuff like that. So Bethlehem became part of that. So David was out there in the war, and he's out there, and the Philistines had control of Bethlehem, and David said, "Oh my, if I could just have some water from the well outside of Bethlehem, how nice would that, oh, that'd be so great." Well, a guy by the name of Abishai took two other guys, mighty men, mighty warriors, and they went out that night, and they went down to Bethlehem, and they snuck up to the well and drew some water for David and brought it back. And they gave it to him, and David said, "What have you done? You risked your life for some water from Bethlehem? What's this? I'm not drinking this from Bethlehem when we're out here at war," and stuff like that. So he pours it out on the ground. Anyway, you remember the account of that what happened and why all that went about. But anyway, it was water from Bethlehem. It took place right there in Bethlehem. So because of David and being anointed king there and such like, it became known as the city of David. Now later, Jerusalem, when it was built and was the capital, also was known as the city of David, but primarily, first, it was Bethlehem that was known as the city of David. So anyway, so that all happened there in Jerusalem. Now the one that you guys all know about, and that's about Jesus. So Joseph was on his way up to pay taxes in Bethlehem, because he's part of David's family. So that's where he came from, was Bethlehem. And so he's moved out of there, and now he has to go back up there and pay his taxes. And who's he taking with him? Mary, his wife, who he was just betrothed to her, which is halfway in the middle of their activity to become husband and wife, whatever. But Mary's pregnant, and she's going up there. And it's just, I kind of think about, I wonder if they passed Rachel's tomb, because Rachel, remember, died in childbirth on that same place in the Bethlehem area, and her tomb is even there, even till now. They have a place that's what they call. They have a name on it, and tradition says that that's actually Rachel's tomb. So I wonder if when they pass by, Mary's going, "Oh no, I remember great grandma, whatever she was, having Benjamin here and died in childbirth, I hope better for me, you know. Hope I get into Jerusalem. So anyway, into Bethlehem. So they go into Bethlehem. She has the baby, and so other things start to happen from there. In that, you know, the king kills the kids in that area, trying to find out, you know, trying to get rid of him and everything. And a few things that are kind of interesting about up to this point is, I don't know if I told you, but Rachel, back in the days when before she was taken as a wife, she was a sheep herder. She took care of her dad's sheep. And that's how they kind of ran across each other at first, as she was tending sheep. And David, he was a sheep herder, so right there in the same area. And now, the birth of Christ, and guess who shows up to worship Jesus when he's born? Yep, shepherds. Some of the first people to show up. Now it's really kind of an unusual thing. There's a place there called Migdal Edgar, whatever that means. But what it means is the tower of the flock. And it's kind of understood that that's where they used to raise the sheep that would be sacrificed in the temple there in Jerusalem, which is only about 8 miles from Bethlehem. And they would raise the sheep there that would be used as sacrifices in Jerusalem at the temple there. And so they had shepherds there taking care of those sheep. And so it's speculated that the shepherds that came to see Christ were the ones of that area that came to see him when he was born. And it's just kind of interesting that all these shepherds, and by the way, the shepherds were low-count people. I mean, they weren't really, but they were looked down on. In fact, if you saw something happen, like you were going to be a witness in court, and you said, "Yeah, I saw the guy steal that money," they said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a shepherd. I watch sheep for Boaz over here. I watch sheep with David." We're not going to listen to you. They wouldn't let you testify in court or legal matters at the gate there if you were a shepherd. That's how they looked down on them. But here we are with Rachel being a shepherd, David being a shepherd. The shepherds showed up, and Jesus then later was called the Good Shepherd. He was the shepherd in a spiritual way. So that was all kind of interesting. But anyway, Micah, back a long time before, and back 700 years before, he prophesied that Jesus the Christ would be born in Bethlehem, and he also calls the area the Tower of the Flock, which is what this Migdal Edgar is translated as, the Tower of the Flock. So it's even mentioned back in Micah. I thought that was pretty cool. But all this happened in Bethlehem, right there. So now, that brings us up to the cross time, because all that happened, and then Christ was crucified. But what I want you to know too is this: there was a guy named Jerome, and he was kind of quite a character. He was sowed his wild oats, and he was rebellious, and he was mouthy, and he was, when he was young, and he got to hanging around the Bethlehem area and started translating all the Hebrew that he saw there in the Bethlehem area, and then he began at the direction of some people to start translating the Hebrew Old Testament, which was their Bible, the Hebrew, into Latin. Okay, somebody had already translated into Greek before, but he was going to do it into Latin. A lot of people didn't like that. They said, "What we got's good enough." But anyway, this guy, he spent all of his life, and it was like, let's see here, 42 to 20, 80 years. 80 years, that's all he did. The history says that he lived in the caves, and right by where Christ was born, and he lived in the cave there, and he didn't take care of himself, didn't comb his hair, didn't cut his nails, he was just a stinky old man, and he was grouchy, he called people names and stuff like that. But anyway, he was translating the Old Testament into Latin, which we call the Vulgate. Okay, so anyway, that happened right there, not just in Bethlehem, but right next to where Jesus was born. I said where he was buried. That's not right. But the place where Jesus was born there's a bunch of caves in that area, and they used those for shelters for animals. Some people lived in them. Some people had, accommodations for visitors, stuff like that in there. Anyway, he took one of the caves that was next to the area where Jesus was actually born, and he lived there, and he translated the Hebrew Bible into Latin. Made a lot of people mad because some of the things he translated, they had been told different by times past, and so. But even today, we still use that translation that he did back just 300 years after Jesus. He translated that, and we still use that a lot as references and as kind of the place to go to see what things are like. Anyway, that's just stuff that happened there in Bethlehem. I just thought it was cool that of all the cities and everything, it's this little town, 8 miles out of Jerusalem, that is all this stuff happened, and even years and years later. And I understand, and I'm not sure about, but they feel like they know exactly, like the tomb of Rachel and the well of Bethlehem. They know exactly where all that stuff is. So you can even go there today, and they'll tell you that you're in the exact place where this happened 4,000 years ago or whatever. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, thought you might like some information on that. Would enjoy knowing some of that and talking about it. So anyway, there you go. So you guys, hope you're taking care of yourself and everything, and hope to see you guys soon. And like always, take care of yourself, and I'll talk to y'all later. Goodbye.